Now, let's take a look at the second text in the 2018 SATs Reading paper. We have a text called Grannie, and we can see from the layout of the page that it's a poem. So let's get straight to the first question. Question 16. Find and copy one word from the first verse that shows that the poet's granny made him feel safe when he was a boy. So we can start reading the text, and we need to know that a verse is a group of words in a poem. So this poem has 1, 2, 3, 4 verses, and we need to look at the first verse for a word that shows Granny made him feel safe. For find and copy questions, it's a good idea to underline any words that we think might show this, and then we can look at what we've underlined and decide which word is most likely. I stayed with her when I was 6, then went to live elsewhere when I was 8 years old. For ages I remembered her faint scent of lavender, the way she'd never scold, no matter what I'd done, and most of all, the way her smile seemed somehow to enfold my whole world like a warm protective shawl. So we can have any of the following words. We can have protective, enfold, warm, or smile. These are all words from the first verse that shows Granny made him feel safe. But though there are 4 answers which are all correct, we should only write one of these words because the question asks for just one word. Notice for find and copy questions, often the word we need to find is not a difficult word. Warm and smile are both easy words with simple meanings, but both would get us the mark for this question because they show that Granny made him feel safe. Question 17. How did the poet's granny react when he behaved badly? Now we don't have the words behaved badly in the poem, but we do have no matter what I'd done, and we're told that she'd never scold no matter what I'd done. So even if he did something bad, we know that Granny would never scold. To scold someone means to criticise them or punish them, but we don't even need to know what scold means to get the mark for this question. We can just write never scold or give any other reference to her not punishing him. And we have to be specific here. If you've written acted like it was no big deal or stayed the same, you would not get the mark for this question. You have to be specific and say that she did not punish him. Question 18. The poet describes his granny as standing mountainous between me and my fear. This makes her sound big and powerful. What other impressions do you get of his granny in the same verse? Give 2 impressions. So here, we need to know what impressions mean. In spoken English, we wouldn't usually say, what impression do you have of that person? We would say, what do you think they're like as a person? So your impression of someone is what you think of them, your opinion about them, the feeling you have about them. So here we can find words to describe Granny's personality. So for your impression of a person, you need to think, are they kind or cruel, loving or hateful, tolerant or rude, caring or selfish, happy or unhappy, calm or anxious, funny or serious, excitable or boring and dull, intelligent or stupid, and so on. So usually for your impression of a person, you can just write one word, or here 2 words because we need to give 2 impressions. So what is Granny like? We've read the first verse, so we can expect mountainous between me and my fear to be in the second verse of the poem. And if we quickly scan the text, we can see it here. So let's read the verse. I knew that I was safe when she was near. So already that gives us the impression that she's gentle and kind, because you wouldn't feel safe around someone who was aggressive and mean. It also gives the impression that she's protective, that she wants to look after him. So, one answer to this question would be to describe her as gentle or kind. And though one word is enough, you can write a short phrase to describe Granny, like the phrase in the example we have here. But there are other possible answers. If we keep on reading, she was so tall, so wide, so large. She would stand mountainous between me and my fear. So that tells us that she seems big, but they've already given big and powerful as their example, and we need to give other impressions. So let's keep on reading. Yet oh, so gentle, and she understood every hope and dream I ever had. So that helps us to form another impression. She's understanding and thoughtful because she knows how he feels. So, as well as gentle and kind, we could have protective because he feels safe when he's near her, or we could have the fact that she is understanding. So for example, she is thoughtful because she knows how he feels. And if we finish the verse, we have, she praised me lavishly when I was good, but never punished me when I was bad. So again, that supports the idea that she's gentle and kind, and also shows that she's tolerant, that she can see things from his point of view, or that she's lenient in not punishing him. So we could write that for our impression as well. Now, an impression doesn't have to be about a person. You might be given a description of a place and have to write your impression of that place. So you could write words like big or small, modern or old-fashioned, tidy or messy, safe or dangerous, and so on. Or there might be questions asking for your impression of someone's attitude towards something, or of the relationship between different people. And in these questions, you will need to write more than one word. But just remember, the impression is the feeling or opinion that you get. Question 19. What was one effect of the poet getting injured in the war? We haven't got to that part yet, so let's keep on reading. Years later, war broke out and I became a soldier and was wounded while in France. So we could probably guess that wounded means injured, but we need to know the effect of him getting injured, so to know what happens next. Back home in hospital, so that tells us one effect, he was sent home or sent to hospital. So we can write that he was sent home, or that he is in hospital, or that he couldn't fight in the war anymore. But there are other possible answers for this question. If we keep reading, we have still very lame. So that's another effect. He was lame, which means that he couldn't walk properly. But even if you don't know what lame means, simply writing lame is enough to get you the mark. And there's one more possible answer. I realised suddenly that circumstance had brought me close to the small town where she was living still, and so I seized the chance to write and ask if she could visit me. So he's in hospital in a town close to where Granny lives, and he's realised that she could visit. Question 20. Look at the verse beginning years later. Find and copy a group of words that means the same as took the opportunity. So the opportunity here, the thing that can now happen, is that he can see Granny again. And this time we need to find and copy not one word, but a group of words. For find and copy questions, it's useful to mark the text, underline words or hear groups of words that you think could be the answer. Now the paragraph beginning years later is the one that we've just read. And seized the chance is our answer here, because it would make sense to say and so I took the opportunity to write and ask if she could visit me, rather than seize the chance. So our answer is seized the chance, but we can also have and so I seized the chance, or seize the chance to write and ask if she could visit me. But as long as we've written seize the chance and not too much text before or after, we'll get the mark for this question. Question 21. What does the poet ask his granny to do? Well, we've just read that I seized the chance to write and ask if she could visit me. So we get the mark for any reference to her coming to visit him. Question 22. She came and I still vividly recall. What do the words vividly recall mean? Well, we might not know what either of these words mean, but if we find them in the text, we can have a guess. She came and I still vividly recall the shock that I received when she appeared. So if something caused him a shock, that's a strong feeling, so suggests he might remember it clearly. Let's keep reading to see what's described next. That dark, cold day, huge Granny was so small, a tiny, frail old lady. It was weird. She hobbled through the ward to where I lay, and drew quite close and hesitating, peered. And then she smiled, and love lit up the day. So, from this we can infer that seeing Granny again was a special moment for him. We also have lots of detail about what happened, so the way she walked, she hobbled, and exactly what she did. So this tells us that he can remember it clearly. So to get both marks for this question, we need to guess that vividly means clearly or strongly, and recall means remembered. And notice that this is a 2-mark question. If we only write what one of the words means, so only write remembered or strongly or clearly, then we will only get 1 mark for this question. Question 23. Explain what the poet finds weird about his granny in the last verse. So let's have a look at the last verse. She came and I still vividly recall the shock that I received when she appeared. That dark, cold day. Huge Granny was so small. A tiny, frail old lady. It was weird. So to him, she now seemed so small, a tiny, frail old lady. But here we need to understand that of course Granny hasn't actually got smaller. She seemed large when he was a child, but that's because he was small. So now that he's grown, he's realised that she's not as large as he'd remembered. So to get 2 marks for this question, we need to explain how memory has changed his perception of his granny. That Granny seemed smaller than he remembered, or that he thought she was small compared to his memory of her, but she wasn't really, it was him that had grown bigger. Or we can say that time has changed his perception, that his thoughts about how large or small his granny is are different from long ago when he was a child. So we're now getting to the kind of question in this paper where we might need to make comparisons to spot what is different or similar at the start and end of a text, rather than just finding the answer in the next bit that we read. You would still get 1 mark for saying that he found it weird that she was so small, but to get both marks, you need to compare his thoughts about her now to his thoughts about her when he was a child. Question 24. She hobbled through the ward to where I lay, and drew quite close and hesitating, peered. Why does she hesitate? So it helps if we understand what the word hesitate means. If you hesitate, it means that you pause before doing something because you're unsure. So why might she hesitate? Why might she pause? It could be a lack of recognition. She hasn't seen her grandson since he was a child, and she was not sure if it was him, or she doesn't know if she'll recognise him. It could also be the state of his health. He's in hospital, so perhaps she doesn't know how sick he is, or she's nervous about seeing his injuries. But let's say we didn't know what hesitate means. Could we still get the mark for this question? Well, perhaps we might. The word why tells us that we need to give a reason, and we probably know what is happening in the poem. We know that Granny hasn't seen him in a long time, and we know that he's in hospital. So we could perhaps guess that hesitating is something you do when you're not sure about something and still try to answer the question. Question 25. What is one thing that did not change about the granny as she got older? So for this question, we need to spot what is similar at different points in the text. In the first paragraph, he writes about her smile made him feel loved, and in the last line, he comes back to this idea, and then she smiled and love lit up the day. So we get the mark for any reference to her smile, or the way that she can make him feel better, or her love. We could also answer where she lives. In the text, it says, brought me close to that small town where she was living still. So she's still living in the same place at the start and at the end of the poem. Question 26. Look at the last verse, beginning she came. Find and copy a group of words that show that his granny makes a difference to the poet during her visit. So we need to read the last verse carefully, underlining anything we think might show that Granny made a difference. For most of the verse, he's talking about how strange he finds it that she's so small. But we know that Granny made a difference because of the last line, and then she smiled and love lit up the day. So the phrase we need is love lit up the day. We can write and then she smiled and we'd still get the mark if we included that, but we don't need to because that's just saying what she did. It doesn't show that what she did made a difference. Love lit up the day shows that she made him feel loved again, so that's the phrase we need. Remember, when it says find and copy a group of words, we will never get the mark if we only write one word, and we won't get the mark for copying out large chunks of text. Question 27. The experience in the last line could be described as amusing, shocking, puzzling, or comforting. So amusing means funny, but this isn't a funny poem. The word shock is used in the poem, but the question is asking us about the last line. That's and then she smiled and love lit up the day. But there's nothing shocking about Granny smiling. We know from earlier in the poem that she often smiles. Puzzling doesn't work because there's nothing confusing about what has happened. Granny has visited him, smiled, and made him feel better. So the word we need to tick is comforting. It's a comforting experience because she's made him feel better. Question 28. Number the following sentences from 1 to 5 to show the order in which they happen in the poem. The first one has been done for you. The poet arrives in France. The poet lives with his granny. The poet is injured. The poet's granny visits him. The poet writes to his granny. So we know that he was injured while in France. So he arrives in France before he gets injured. Then the poet writes to his granny, and the poet's granny visits him. So this is a summarised question. We need to look at the whole text to answer it. Question 29. The poet describes different stages of his life. Tick the 2 verses that are mainly about the poet's adult life. So the verses we need to tick are verse 3 and verse 4. In verse 3, we can see that he's talking about being a soldier and getting wounded in war, and usually children aren't soldiers and don't go to war. And then in verse 4, it's about Granny visiting him after he was wounded, so we need to tick verse 4 as well. If we look back at verses 1 and 2, we can see that he was a child in both of these. In the first verse, he mentions being 6 and 8 years old, and then in the second verse, he says Granny never punished him when he was bad. So that suggests that he's a child, because normally adults are not punished by their grannies when they're bad.